People think betrayal comes loud. It doesn't. Sometimes it walks into your home, asks for dinner, and pockets your future on the way out. If you've lived through anything like that, tell me your story in the comments. The fire had burned low that afternoon. I made my way to the hearth to clear out the last of the ash, when a scrap of paper caught my eye. Its edges had curled and blackened, but the center survived enough for the ink to show through. My own name sat above a signature that looked far too familiar, and above that the words, "Last Will and Testament." A cold sting moved through my chest. The signature resembled mine, but not the way my hand worked these days. The strokes felt borrowed. Someone tried to make it pass. Someone close. My thumb brushed the burned edge while my mind scrambled to place how a document like this ended up half destroyed in my fireplace. I had never drafted a will. Not once. I bent down to lift the paper, trying to keep it from falling apart. Before I could straighten up, the front door flew open. Brian Fowler stepped in with a startled jolt, keys still in his hand, breath unsteady. His eyes dropped to the scrap pinched between my fingers. "What are you doing there?" The question hit fast, careless, and too sharp to sound natural. I held the burned page higher. "What is this?" Brian moved quicker than usual, as if hoping to snatch it before I could look too long. "Must be an old draft. From somebody. You already burned it, so it's nothing." His fingers hovered close to mine, twitching. The man couldn't keep still. Every inhale seemed shorter than the one before. An old draft, voice stayed level. Years of dealing with crisis kept it that way. "Then why does it have my signature?" He blinked at the question, stumbled over his own words. "I don't know. Maybe a lawyer sent the wrong papers. Could be anything, Sam." "Don't overthink it." He kept drifting from one excuse to another, building walls of flimsy sentences. The way his gaze bounced around the room told a different story. Something had gone wrong for him the moment I picked up that scrap. "Let me ask you something," I said. "Why is your name listed as the sole beneficiary?" He froze. His throat flexed, but nothing came out at first. When the words finally landed, they limped. "Look, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. Paperwork like that, sometimes it's better if we handle it for you." The room seemed to compress around us. Even the floor carried that strain between two people who had run out of places to hide. I slipped the fragment into my jacket pocket. "I'll look into it myself." He followed me into the hallway with a shaky grin that didn't match his eyes. "Don't misunderstand. I'm trying to help." The act fell apart the closer he stood. For months he'd dodged questions, steered conversations, pressed for access to things that weren't his. Now, the mask faltered. I stepped onto the porch without another word. Brian trailed behind, stopping halfway down the steps. His shoes shifted in the gravel, a man who didn't know whether to step forward or run. He watched while I reached for my keys. A tremble moved through him, subtle but real fear of something unraveling faster than he could control. The engine turned over, steady and familiar. As I pulled away, he remained planted in the yard, shoulders tight-mouthed, parted as if he still had something left to say. The clerk at the notary office pulled the charred scrap toward her with 2 fingers, careful not to crumble it further. She studied the stamp first, then moved to her keyboard, without saying much. Only the tapping of keys filled the room while she compared signatures on her screen with the one burned into that paper. After a minute, she leaned back. "The seal is authentic," she said, "but this signature doesn't match the one we have on file for you." A tightness gathered across my shoulders. She wasn't finished. "There's something else." A digital copy of this will was uploaded and then removed from our system a few weeks ago. Someone logged in under a temporary credential to do it. Something in me stiffened. A stranger wouldn't have access to my documents. Family, though. Family could reach things that should have been left alone. It felt like a bruise someone kept poking. The clerk pressed her lips together, then motioned me toward a small office down the hall. "You should talk to Maria Alvarez," she said. "She handles legal irregularities." Maria stood over her desk when I stepped in, sleeves rolled past her elbows, posture steady. The kind of person who didn't guess. She verified. She asked for the document, gave it a slow examination, and then looked up at me with a directness that left no room for illusions. "This isn't an accident," she said. No hesitation. Someone meant for this to exist. Her tone carried the weight of a simple truth. Whoever forged it knew exactly what they were doing. "Has anyone borrowed your identification?" she asked. "Filed taxes for you? Helped with bills?" The question sent me back 3 years. The weeks after my wife died were a blur. Brian had stepped in often, offering to handle taxes, paperwork errands. That period was a fog of loss, and he'd used that fog to move closer than he ever should have. Maria watched my reaction. "If someone had access, then they could have taken more liberty than you realized." The thought settled heavily. Trust had always come too easily to me. I thanked her promise to return once I checked my records, and left with the weight of the burned page pressing against my pocket. When I drove home, Brian was already there, seated on the steps, as if he'd been rehearsing worry. His hands rubbed together in a nervous rhythm. He stood when the truck rolled into the driveway. "You went to check that paperwork again?" he asked, stepping toward me with a forced grin. No answer came out of me. The door to the house creaked when I opened it, and he followed close enough for his breath to brush the back of my neck. "It's not what you think," he insisted. "I just needed a little security. I don't have anybody left." The house felt wrong with him trailing through it. A sense of trespass came over me, not because he was under my roof, but because something in his tone tried to anchor guilt to my chest. He kept talking, words dripping in wounded self-pity. "After your daughter passed, everything fell apart for me. You know that. She was my whole world. Her name had become a tool for him, a shield, a bargaining chip. I need time," I said. Nothing more. The shift in his face was quick hurt. First, then calculation. "I just want things to settle," he murmured. "You should think about the future, Sam." It carried a message he didn't bother hiding. He expected something from me, and soon. He walked away with slow steps, glancing back once. A strange tension clung to him, like he was waiting for news he hoped wouldn't arrive. After the door closed behind him, the house didn't feel the way it used to. My feet carried me to the file cabinet in the study, before the thought even formed. The drawer slid open, and folders shifted loosely where everything had once been lined up in neat order. Tax returns, property assessments. My old pension statements pages sat out of sequence. Some pushed forward as if they'd been thumbed through recently. A folder I kept for emergency contacts had a crease that hadn't been there before. Another held a sticky note in a handwriting that wasn't mine, a reminder for a date I didn't recognize. A pulse of anger stirred, subtle but sharp. Someone had rifled through things that held the last remains of my private life, the things meant only for me. I stepped back, breathing slow, as the realization settled. Brian knew too much. He'd been alone in this house countless times. Enough opportunities for him to explore, to scheme, to lay groundwork for whatever he thought he deserved. The phone came out of my pocket without me deciding. Maria answered on the second ring. Forging a will, I asked how serious is that. Her pause was short. Very serious. But you'll need stronger proof than one burned page. Proof. That word cut straight through me. There had to be more. Someone had left traces in my home. Someone had tried to bury their intentions in ash. Maria spread the stack of folders across her desk, pulling each document free with deliberate care. The papers had traveled with me from home in a cardboard box I hadn't opened in years. She skimmed the first set, then slid it aside. Another set followed. Her expression barely shifted until one page stopped her hand. "Hold on," she murmured. "This is different." The sheet belonged to my property file. A request for temporary management transfer sat at the top, dated 3 months earlier. A signature rested at the bottom, curved, leaning slightly left, nearly identical to the one on the burned will. My stomach tightened. I never filed anything like that. Maria turned the page toward me. Someone tried to submit it but didn't finish the process. "See this code?" She tapped a small notation near the corner. "It's incomplete, but the signature, whoever forged the will forged this too." She traced a name typed along the margin. The applicant was listed as R. Fowler. The letters struck like a blow. Brian's name didn't begin with R. Richard Fowler Sr. I asked more to confirm my own fear than to seek her answer. "That's the only match I can think of," she said. "Does he have any reason to access your files?" Memories shuffled into place, one after another. I hadn't spoken more than a handful of sentences to Richard since my daughter's funeral. He'd shown up weeks after carrying an envelope of sympathy money nobody asked for. During that visit, he'd looked around my home with a focus I'd mistaken for grief. "Maria, I barely know the man," I said. She folded her arms and leaned back, assessing me like she was trying to connect pieces scattered across a floor. Then someone with his name or credentials attempted something major. "You said Brian had helped you with documents in the past. Are you sure he acted alone?" The question unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Partnerships built on desperation could lead anywhere. My phone buzzed. Brian's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. Messages followed the preview text offering vague pleas to meet. Maria eyed the screen. "Persistent," she said. "He's been escalating," I replied. The phone finally went silent. Relief lasted only seconds before the next alert popped up, this time from my neighbor, Anna, asking why Brian had been knocking on her door, asking if I was home. A prickle ran over my skin. The reach he thought he had over my life stretched farther than I realized. Maria closed the last folder. "This isn't just an attempt to scare you," she said. "Someone wants a legal path into your assets, and they're sloppy enough to leave traces." There wasn't much more to say. I thanked her and left the office, my head spinning through details that refused to settle. Brian waited for me sooner than expected. Not at my house this time, but at the diner off Route 66. He cornered me the moment I stepped through the door, waving me toward a booth, like someone trying to hide a stain. "We need to talk," he said. "This whole thing with that R. Fowler name, someone typed it wrong. That's all." I stayed on my side of the table. "A wrong letter doesn't produce my signature." He shifted, tugging his sleeve down, but not fast enough. A faint puncture mark on his forearm caught my eye. Maria had mentioned that fake notary authorization sometimes required signing on digital pads or giving handwriting samples. Getting those samples meant small needle sticks that left marks. "When did you get that?" I asked, nodding toward his arm. "Nothing," he snapped. "A blood test." "Can I have one without being interrogated?" His voice pitched upward, stretching toward indignation. "He wouldn't meet my eyes." "Brian," I said calmly, "if you know something, now is the time to tell me." He swallowed hard, jaw clenching. "Don't do this. Don't turn me into the villain. That line hung in the air. The truth behind it tasted bitter. People who caused harm often painted themselves as the ones suffering most. I pushed back from the table. "We're done here." Brian shot up, reaching toward me with a trembling hand. "Wait, listen, I've heard enough." His face drained of color. "Just don't make this worse," he called after me. "You have no idea what you're getting into. He wasn't wrong about that part." The danger in his tone didn't spring from bluster. It came from fear. Fear of someone above him. Fear of a plan larger than his own clumsy attempts. I walked toward the truck, replaying every clue in my mind. A forged request. A forged will. A man I barely knew showing up in my life at carefully chosen moments. The phone buzzed again this time from an unknown number. A single sentence appeared. "If you keep digging, this won't end well for you." The latch on the western shed hung crooked, swaying in a way it shouldn't have. That lock had been replaced only a month earlier, after years of rust made the old one stick. Seeing it ajar sent a pulse of unease through my chest. I pushed the door open with care and stepped over the threshold. Something was off. The power cord that normally ran along the back wall lay severed, the copper edges exposed. A heavy wooden crate sat several feet from where I kept it. A tarp bunched up near the corner displayed a fresh boot print, bigger than anything Brian would leave behind. The sight pointed toward someone with a larger frame, someone older. Richard Fowler Sr. came to mind immediately, though the idea felt too bold to accept without proof. My hand drifted to my phone before the thought even settled. Maria answered on the first ring. "What's wrong?" she asked. "The shed's been disturbed." "A lock-forced equipment moved," I said. "That tarp has a footprint bigger than Brian's." She exhaled sharply. "If you think someone's targeting you, document everything. And I mean everything. Consider using a recorder if you suspect a setup." Her insistence held weight. She wasn't trying to scare me, she was urging me to be ahead of whatever was coming. After the call ended, I walked through the shed once more, taking pictures and trying to steady my thoughts. By late afternoon, Brian appeared at my driveway, waving like we shared some casual bond. He hurried toward me before I could turn away. "We need to talk, Sam," he said. "Just a minute, please." His smile stretched too tight, and his eyes darted around as if checking whether anyone else stood near. "I'm not interested," I replied. "Don't say it like that. I'm just trying to figure things out. You've been looking into stuff and it's making everything complicated." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "The shed, whatever's going on out there, maybe leave it alone." The hair along my arms lifted. "How do you know I was at the shed?" His mouth opened then closed. He tried to recover with a stammered excuse. "I mean, people talk. You mentioned it once. Or maybe I saw your truck headed that way." None of it made sense. He backed away, muttering that he didn't want problems, then forced a final nod and left. Evening settled fast over the hills. A restlessness pushed me to return to the shed. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as I eased the truck along the path. A vehicle I didn't recognize sat parked near the turnoff, its shape barely visible from where I stopped. Two figures slipped out of the shed and disappeared behind it. I stepped out and moved behind the low wall that marked the edge of the old foundation from decades ago. The voices carried just enough to make out the tension. Brian spoke first, softer than usual, like he was being scolded. "He's poking around again. I told him to drop it." Another man answered deeper, more forceful. "He won't. We need to finish this before he changes his mind and goes to court." The tone held command. Richard Sr. had that kind of voice, the type that assumed obedience without asking. "He's old," Richard said. "One fall in here, and the rest explains itself." Every word fueled a heaviness that settled in my chest. I fought the urge to storm in and confront them. Instead, I slid my phone out and tapped the recorder, keeping the device close so their words would come through. "It needs to look real," Brian whispered. "It will if you stick to the plan," Richard replied. "Just be ready." Their conversation paused. Brian shifted his weight, gravel scraping. Silence pressed down for a moment too long. A twig snapped beneath my heel before I could shift it aside. Their voices cut out. A beam swept across the shed as someone flicked on a flashlight. It sliced through the darkness hunting movement. My heartbeat thudded hard enough to feel in my throat. I crouched, easing backward as quietly as possible. Footsteps crunched toward the entrance. More light flickered. Someone stepped outside, scanning the area. I slipped along the side of the building, careful not to brush against the metal siding. The truck sat only a few yards ahead. My hand gripped the phone so tight my knuckles stiffened. Another voice muttered something I couldn't catch, and a second set of steps moved closer. Getting to the truck felt like crossing a long stretch of sand with no cover. Each movement seemed too loud. Gravel shifted under my boots as I reached the door. I climbed in, shut it gently, and turned the key. The phone started buzzing before I made it up the porch steps. Message after message vibrated through my pocket, Brian's voice spilling out in strained fragments when I finally played one. "You misunderstood me. Please, Sam, let me explain. I'm begging you." Each voicemail carried tears, fear, desperation, whatever tone he thought might pull me back toward him. I didn't answer. The deadbolt clicked beneath my hand. Once the door shut, I locked every latch in the house, then walked straight to the back entry. The smaller lock had fresh scrape marks near the edge. Not much, just enough to suggest someone tried prying it. They were new. A memory I'd pushed aside for years rose without warning the night sitting beside my daughter's bed, worrying her husband's family would interfere with her care, worrying about the arguments behind closed doors, worrying I'd step in and make everything worse for her. I'd swallowed my concerns then. I wasn't about to repeat that mistake. The recording from the shed needed to go somewhere safe. Maria answered immediately when I called. "I have something," I told her. "They were talking about staging an accident." "How clear is it?" she asked. Clear enough to know it wasn't a joke. She listened while I replayed the audio. When the clip ended, she exhaled slowly. "This is serious," she said. "But we still need more. You have to protect yourself before they act on any of this." Her words sat deep in my chest. Not warnings, instructions for survival. A hard knock broke the moment. Another followed faster. I moved toward the peephole. Brian stood on the other side, pale, jittery, knocking with the frantic rhythm of someone unraveling. Sam opened the door. "Please just talk to me." Between his shoulder and the edge of my porch, a familiar truck caught my eye. A gray pickup angled across the street, engine running. The same kind of vehicle I'd seen near the shed. The posture of everyone involved suggested coordination. I stepped back from the door. His tone shifted as he sensed resistance. "Did you tell anyone?" he demanded. "Who told you what happened? Who have you been talking to?" The urgency in his voice confirmed what I already feared. He knew exactly what had been overheard. And whoever sat waiting in that truck wanted the same answers. No chance I was opening the door. His knocks slowed, then stopped. Gravel crunched a moment later, and the truck drifted down the road at a crawl. Night settled heavier than usual. Unease crawled low along my spine. A small digital recorder from the drawer became the best insurance I had. Out in the garage, it slid behind a stack of old paint cans, quiet, hidden, waiting. If they came back, at least the truth would have a witness. Sleep never found me. A faint motor kept looping the neighborhood, sliding past every half hour. The living room felt smaller with each pass of those slow-rolling tires. By morning, frustration had taken over. The truck headed straight for the Coconino County Sheriff's Office. No appointment, no hesitation. A deputy at the front asked a few questions and ushered me into a small interview room. "Who do you believe is attempting to access your property?" he asked. "Brian Fowler," I answered. Not a word about Richard Fowler Sr., too early for that. Too easy for them to deny without stronger proof. The deputy scribbled notes, asked about the lock, the shed, the truck. When the tampered door came up, he nodded and promised patrols in the area for a few days. Not much, but it was something. Sunlight hit hard once I stepped outside. Another buzz from the phone unknown number. "You just made a mistake." Breath stalled. Threats had danced around the edges before, but this was the first one delivered in writing. Driving uphill toward Pine Canyon steadied the hands a little. Tall timber carved the road into a quiet corridor, giving space to think. A turnout appeared, and the truck idled while questions churned. How long had they been planning? How often had they slipped into the shed, or worse, not knowing weighed heavier than anything else? Eventually, the drive looped back toward town. As soon as the road leveled, a vehicle eased into view behind me. Not the gray truck, Brian's own. He kept distance, but the presence never wavered. Lane changes didn't shake him. He couldn't have known where I'd been. Yet there he was, shadowing every mile. Whatever trap Richard Sr. had laid out, Brian was neck deep in it. My turnoff approached. Instead of heading home, the wheel cut toward the dirt road leading to the shed. The truck behind ghosted the motion at first, then hesitated, stopping short at the intersection. Gravel cracked beneath the tires as the truck rolled to a stop. Somewhere inside that shed, the recorder waited, maybe holding the one thing that could turn suspicion into fact. Halfway to the door, a chill crawled up the back of my neck. Someone felt close. The shed felt heavier than before, as if the air had thickened from all the things spoken there the night prior. My eyes scanned the shadows until the small recorder revealed itself behind a stack of crates. The device sat exactly where I'd left it. I snatched it up and pressed play. Brian's voice came through, first anxious and uneven. "If he heard anything last night, we're done. I'm telling you, we went too far." Then Richard Fowler Sr. cut him off with a bark sharp enough to make my skin tighten. "Enough. Let me handle it. The girl's gone and that old man has no one left. That land should move to our side of the family." My grip tightened. The way he said "our side" made it sound like I was an outsider, trespassing on ground that somehow belonged to them by birthright. A twisted logic built from entitlement rather than grief. The recording continued. "When he falls in the shed," Richard growled, "I'll call 911 myself. They'll think it was an accident." Hearing those words spoken so casually, like planning a remodel or deciding what lumber to buy, jolted something deep in me. A surge of disbelief mixed with a cold understanding. This wasn't panic or improvisation. This was calculated. That alone proved Maria had been right. They intended harm, and soon. Returning to the truck felt like trudging through wet cement. Once in the driver's seat, the recorder still playing, my hands trembled just enough to make hitting the stop button harder than it should have been. The next move required urgency. Maria needed the file immediately. Sending it through email seemed quickest, so I forwarded the recording before doubt had room to interfere. Her call came before the attachment fully uploaded. "Sam, this is it," she said. "This crosses into attempted homicide. You need to get to the station right now. Don't wait." Her tone carried no room for negotiation. I started the engine. Before shifting into reverse, a shape blocked the exit of the shed's dirt clearing. Brian stepped out from behind a tree, hands raised slightly, as if surrendering to something unseen. His face looked drained, lips trembling. "Sam." "Please," he said, stumbling toward me. I didn't want it to go this far. I owe people money. I didn't have a choice. I rolled the window down halfway, keeping one hand near the gear shift. Move. He stepped closer instead. Help me just this once. I'm begging you. If you tell anyone, his words froze. A sudden roar from the road made both of us look up. A black SUV barreled toward us, brakes screaming as it skidded to a halt. Dust shot upward. The driver's door flew open. Richard Fowler Sr. stepped out with the confidence of a man who had spent decades forcing others to yield. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Get in the car, he ordered Brian. Now. Brian obeyed instantly, as if someone had yanked invisible strings. His eyes darted back to me, once full of a kind of desperation that didn't look manufactured anymore. Richard turned to me with a sneer. You've been alone too long, Carter. Men like you lose track of where they stand. One misstep out here, no one sees you again. The threat landed without theatrics, more chilling, because of how casually he tossed it out. He climbed back into the SUV, and the doors slammed shut. Gravel flew behind the tires as they tore away from the clearing. My pulse steadied only after the vehicle vanished beyond the trees. I didn't wait to see if they circled back. The truck lurched forward as I sped toward the main road. Halfway down the highway, headlights appeared in the mirror, a single car keeping a steady distance, mimicking each lane change I made. I kept my speed consistent, at first watching how closely they matched me. When doubt turned to certainty, I floored the accelerator and veered right toward a narrow service road. The tailing vehicle overshot the turn, giving me a few precious seconds to vanish behind a ridge. The truck fishtailed, but regained traction, and I clenched the wheel until my knuckles burned. By the time I reached the sheriff's office, Maria stood outside with 2 investigators. She motioned me forward, hustling me through the doors. They heard the file, she said. They know what you're dealing with. One detective spoke next. We need everything you've recorded, every detail. They may act at any moment. Those words echoed inside me with a finality I wasn't ready for, but there wasn't space for hesitation. I handed over the recorder, my notes, every file I'd collected. Hours passed in brief statements and clarifications. When they finally allowed me to leave, the sun hovered low, stretching the day into something long and unsettled. Stepping back into the parking lot brought a thin current of unease. Across the street, the same gray pickup sat angled toward the exit. Its windows reflected nothing. The cab sat empty, doors shut, no footsteps nearby. Yet the presence of that truck felt intentional, like someone had left it there to watch, even without a driver. The drive home left my thoughts spinning through every warning I'd been given. If Richard Fowler Sr. wanted an accident, then the only way to stop him was to let him try while the police stood ready to watch him expose himself. The idea felt reckless, but nothing else stood between me and whatever those men planned for me. I called Maria. They won't stop. If they want that shed so badly, then that's where we catch them. She didn't waste time questioning the logic. Stay on the line, she said. I'm bringing the detectives in. Her voice disappeared for a moment. Murmurs of discussion followed, and when she returned, her tone carried a practiced certainty. They agree. You'll go to the shed tonight, as if nothing's wrong. They'll place sensors around the ridge and keep units close enough to intervene. And if they act faster than the officers? Then you stall, she said. Use your recorder. Buy seconds, not minutes. A knot formed in my stomach, but I agreed. It wasn't courage that pushed the plan forward, just a lack of options. Hours later, the shed loomed ahead, calm enough to look harmless. I moved to the door with exaggerated casualness, pretending I'd come to fetch tools or check supplies like any other evening. The hinges groaned when I pulled the door open, and the shadows swallowed the narrow path between the crates. The stillness didn't last long. A beam cut across the entrance. Headlights swept the ground as a truck rolled to a stop, angling itself toward me. My pulse picked up, but I held my position. Another door slammed. 2 sets of footsteps approached. Brian emerged first, shoulders hunched, eyes darting between me and the darkness. Behind him, Richard Fowler Sr. carried something heavy, a crowbar or a metal bar gripped with casual certainty. "There you are," Richard said. "Saves us trouble." Brian swallowed hard, almost whispering. "We don't have to do this." Richard shoved him aside. "He's had enough time to hand things over. Now we finish it." He stepped closer, raising the metal tool just enough for his intention to land. "You just need to fall, Carter. The rest will sort itself out." My hand slid into my jacket pocket, fingers brushing the recorder Maria told me to use. Triggering it bought precious seconds. A soft click signaled it had begun collecting their words. "Think about what you're doing," I said, backing up 1 slow step. "I've thought plenty," Richard snapped. "You lived alone too long. Got confused about whose future this land belongs to." Another step narrowed the distance between us. His patience thinned by the second. Brian lingered behind him, trembling so visibly his knees looked ready to buckle. "Dad, wait." Brian tried again. "Enough," Richard snarled. "Stand back." His grip tightened around the tool, and he lunged 1 step closer. I opened my mouth to stall him further, but a sharp wail cut through the night, the unmistakable blast of a police siren. Richard froze. Brian spun toward the hill. Flashing lights spilled through the trees as officers poured down the slope in coordinated formation. Commands filled the air, firm and immediate. Sheriff's Department dropped the weapon. Richard hesitated, then tried to bolt toward the truck. 2 deputies tackled him before he made it 3 strides. The crowbar clattered to the ground. He thrashed against their hold, spitting fury the entire time. "He deserved it," Richard shouted. "That land should have been ours. He's nothing without her, nothing." Those words hung in the air like poison, stripping away any remaining illusion about his motives. Brian's face drained of color. The metal rod he had been holding fell from his hand with a dull thud. "I didn't want this," he whispered. "I swear it, Sam. I swear." Officers separated him from his father. 1 deputy guided me away from the scuffle, checking that I was steady on my feet. My breath came rough but manageable. Leaning against the shed wall offered brief grounding. "You're safe now," the deputy said. "We got here before anyone got hurt." Richard was handcuffed, still cursing at every officer who tried to move him. Brian stood yards away, silent, shaking so hard his hands couldn't stay still. His eyes kept flicking toward me, pleading for something I couldn't give. "Sam, please. Say something," he called out. Detectives began photographing the ground, collecting the crowbar marking footprints. Officers swept the perimeter to confirm no one else hid nearby. The shed, once just a place for tools, and old lumber, now echoed with radio chatter and the scrape of evidence bags. I stepped aside as 2 deputies carried more equipment through the doorway. The orderly rhythm of their work filled the building, turning the familiar structure into a documented crime scene, piece by piece. Nothing about it felt real yet. Not the arrests, not the threats shouted moments earlier, not even the fact that I was still standing. But the sight of the officers cataloging every inch told me the night wasn't finished rewriting my life. The summons arrived 2 weeks after the arrests. A simple envelope, my name written in plain type. No ceremony, just instructions to appear at the Arizona Superior Court as the primary witness. Something about the lack of pretense steadied me. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was just the next step. The courthouse stood firm when I walked through its doors, a place built for arguments sharper than anything my life had held before. A clerk guided me toward the witness room, and minutes later an officer led me into the courtroom itself. The benches creaked as people shifted. The hum of conversation faded when the judge entered. I took my seat in the witness box. The prosecutor began with the forged will. "Mr. Carter, is this your signature?" "No," I answered. He displayed another sheet, then another tracing the pattern of fraud from the first attempt at temporary property transfer to the false testament burned in my fireplace. He walked the court through the handwriting analyst's findings, the notary records, the forged access credentials. The more he laid out, the more the room learned how deeply the Fowler family had tried to bury their intentions beneath legal jargon and stolen documentation. Next came the recordings. My own voice mixed with theirs, the shed echoing through the courtroom speakers. Brian's fear shook the walls. Richard Fowler Sr.'s contempt cut through every pause. Then the line that shifted everything. "When he falls in the shed, I'll call 911. They'll think it was an accident." Even in a courtroom, hearing it again clenched something deep in my ribs. The prosecutor walked the jury through the rest trespassing, tampering with locks, the circling truck the night they tried to corner me. What once felt like paranoia had solidified into a timeline the jury could touch. When the defense rose, they tried to paint Richard as a grieving man who'd lost his way. Misguided, pressured, misunderstood. But his own outburst during the arrest, ranting about entitlement land and lineage, cut their argument off at the knees. No one in the courtroom looked convinced. Brian kept his gaze locked on the table. His fingers twisted until the knuckles turned white. Not once did he look my way. Not when the forged documents were mentioned. Not when the recording caught him whispering in fear. Not even when the charges were read aloud. The verdict came in steady strokes. Richard Fowler Sr. guilty of attempted homicide, document fraud, conspiracy trespassing, and multiple counts of harassment. Brian Fowler guilty of aiding in fraudulent paperwork conspiracy and intimidation. Fewer years than Richard, but prison all the same. The judge spoke at length, but the words blurred. There was no satisfaction in seeing two men cuffed, just the quiet finality of something ending. When court adjourned, my steps carried me out of the room without hesitation. No anger, no relief, just a weight slipping free. Outside, the dry, high desert wind met me on the courthouse steps. Maria waited near the railing, briefcase tucked under one arm. "You handled yourself well," she said. "I just told the truth." She studied me. "So, what now?" The question lingered. My Flagstaff house was full of echoes. My daughter's last months, the strain, the manipulation that seeped into every corner. "Distance," I said. "For a while." She nodded. "Distance can teach." We parted. She walked toward the offices. I crossed the street toward the parking lot, already knowing what needed to come next.